Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Watermark Search webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on the workforce. I'm Lisa McAuliffe, and I'm a partner in the Watermark Interim practice here in Sydney. And I'm joined today by my colleagues Caroline McAuliffe, Suzanne Mulverhill, and Alicia Wilson from our Sydney office, and Jacinta Whelan and Donna Burr, our partners in our Melbourne office. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Today's webinar is going to run for 45 minutes. And we will be recording the session, so there's no need to take copious notes. Rest assured that your information and all your details will remain private. We won't be sharing any of your personal details. We will be asking some polling questions throughout Natalie's presentation, so please do help us make this as interactive as possible and vote where you can. There's also going to be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the webinar, but you can jump on board anytime and ask your questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we will endeavour, of course, to answer as many as we can, but if we don't get through them today, we will follow up via an email with the responses and also the recording of today's session. So our topic today is foremost in all our minds. I think it's fair to say that COVID-19 has been a great leveller. It doesn't matter who you are or what industry you work in, everybody has been impacted, and work as we know it will never be the same again. So transformation and change is inevitable, but what will that look like? And how do we prepare ourselves for what lies ahead? So we're grateful today to have with us Natalie Ranki-Goldman, who is going to share her thoughts and experience in this regard. Natalie is a leading expert on flexible working and previous CEO of Flex Careers. She's been an advocate in this space for over 10 years, where she's been working with companies, embedding and normalizing flexible work practices. Just before I hand over to Natalie, however, I just want to give you a quick update on Watermark and what we're experiencing in the market today. So we've actually been seeing an increasing amount of activity over the last couple of weeks, which is encouraging. Our clients are telling us that COVID-19 has actually highlighted some critical areas within their organizations where there have been gaps in expertise. So as they shift from crisis to recovery mode, we are anticipating that there will be an increase in interim requirements. And in fact, that the interim executive workforce is going to be a key resource in assisting these organizations work through the challenges that they face as they rebuild and reinvent their operations in order to serve their clients and customers. So whilst that's really good news in terms of our cohort of interim executives, we are seeing that the market is becoming more and more competitive, and there are more people choosing this way of working. So it is essential for you that you have you're very clear about your value proposition and what it is you can bring to the table. Your superpowers, as we call them here at Watermark. So these need to be delivered in a concise and clear manner through your resume, through your one-page bio, your LinkedIn profile, and of course your elevator pitch when you're speaking to potential employers or your network. Nobody should be left in any doubt in terms of what it is you can bring to their organization. Remaining competitive in this market also means remaining relevant, and that's remaining relevant in your field of expertise. So that means making sure your technical skills are up to date, your digital know-how and capability is up to speed, and you're a knowledge expert in your industry. And there are many, many ways of doing that. There's reading, research, making sure you're across industry trends, attending webinars and virtual conferences, and contributing to LinkedIn articles or Twitter feeds. These are all perfect ways of expanding your knowledge and creating your own personal brand. So just leaving you with some advice today, I would suggest that it's really important as we move into this new world of work, that you have a very clear and concise value proposition coupled with a growth mindset. And that's really going to give you the edge as we move forward. Finally, before I sign off, I just want to share an infographic with you that looks at some of the behaviours that we've been experiencing and continue to experience as we move through COVID-19. Initially, I think it's fair to say that we were all in the fear zone, not knowing what was around the corner, panic buying, dealing with the complete unknown. But as we move through the learning zone, we've learned to accept what we can't control and realize that, you know, we're all doing our best and we're making the best of a situation that we've never faced before. Finally, as we move into the growth zone, we're choosing ideally to adopt an open and positive mindset where we look into the future and we look at ways in which we can be agile and adapt to change and adapt our offerings to new organizations. So it's certainly not easy to have that positive mindset all of the time, and we mustn't berate ourselves if we flip backwards and forwards between the zones. It's completely natural and often dictated by our circumstances and situations. But the important thing is that we are aware of how we're feeling and our emotions, and that we're kind to ourselves and have empathy to others also where possible. So from a Watermark perspective, we're here to help. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to the team here at Watermark. We know it can be a little bit isolating when you're working as an interim executive, especially if you're in between opportunities. So reach out, or just, you know, even if you just need a sounding board, we're here. But I think without further ado, I should hand over to Natalie now for today's presentation. So over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Lisa, and what a wonderful introduction. It's really great to be here and to share with you some of my thoughts around the impact of COVID-19 on the workforce. So we'll shift to the next slide, where I'll share with you what we're going to be covering off today. And at any point, feel free to pop any questions into the Q&A down at the bottom of the panel there. Of the Zoom webinar, and we'll aim to get to as many of them as possible in the Q&A session. So today we're going to start off about setting the scene. Where are we today? And even when I was speaking with Lisa and the team around doing this webinar a number of weeks ago, the situation from initially when writing this webinar and putting the information together changes. It changes month to month, week to week, sometimes even day to day. So what we're seeing is that the future of work is here. It's about flexible working, not just working from home, and we'll talk about that. We'll also address, well, what are those impacts on individuals? What's happening to each of us, but also on companies and organisations that we may either be working with or looking to work with. There are going to be lots of buzzwords used and have been used previously and will continue to be used, such as innovation, creativity and change. But I'll unpack some of those and talk about why they need to still be part of our vernacular. And I'll also be sharing with you some of the shifts that we're starting to see and the conversations that are being had around shift in products and services and even in industries. And last but definitely not least, we'll be touching on what does Australia's recovery look like. So we'll move to our next slide around setting the scene. But before we get into that, we have a poll that we're going to ask you to answer. That should come up on your screen in just a moment. There we go. So what I'd like to find out from you is, what type of flexible working have you experienced in your previous roles? And what I mean by that is pre-COVID. So prior to going into lockdown here in Australia, were you working from home in any particular way, or any of the other types of flexible working? And please choose your top 3. And then in a moment, the lovely Alicia will be sharing with us all the answers to your poll. Alicia, do we have the answers to those? I think they're coming through right now. Well, what we've seen is a significant amount of flexible working has been happening, which is really great to see, and with only 4% saying none. So the majority of you have either worked from home, worked from another location, and have negotiated different start and finishing times. We've also seen, by the look of things like ability to purchase additional annual leave or taking unpaid leave. And a few of you have even gone down the compressed work week, fortnight, month, and so on, and a few percent of other. So thank you to all of you for sharing. But what we're probably going to see is a shift in that, and we'll address that in our next slide. But where are we now? Where are we here today? Depending on what state you're in, of course, the level of restrictions that are easing varies. And even a conversation that I had with my daughter just even last night, when she said, well, can I have some friends over? And if so, how many? I had to jump online and have a look just to see what's the latest, because things are rapidly changing and I couldn't remember exactly. So it's really important to recognize the pace of change. We've gone through a very fast period of lockdown where there was a very quick quarantine and going into isolation, which has been fantastic for our country and has proven really well. However, now is where restrictions are easing and conversations around how we go back to work, kids are back at school, all those kinds of things. This is also now change is happening again after a period of maybe 2 months of some level of quietness and also stationary moments. So what we're looking at now is where to go forward. So one of the first and most important things, which may not have been such a focus before, is about health. Health is at the center of all workplaces and also should be on our individuals' minds as well, the impact that we have, because COVID has had a massive human impact and continues to do so. Thankfully, in Australia, like I said, we've flattened the curve and we are maintaining a really, really good numbers. However, it requires us to be cautious and consistent to continue with social distancing. So what does that mean when we talk about going back to work? Well, it means things like employers are looking at, well, how many people can I have in the office? How can desks be put down into, do we have the same number of desks? Do we rotate the number of people that come into the office on any given day? And even getting to the office, such as issues around public transport, or even if you work in a CBD type area and you might be in a larger building, you know, getting into even the office via a lift would be really challenging. So there's some very practical and challenging issues that organizations need to understand, and even for yourself. There was a poll with The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, and over 60% said they're not ready to go back into the office, whilst 40% yes said absolutely. So it's quite clear that going back to the way that we used to work and live is not going to be a reality. However, going forward means that we're going to pick and choose the things that we used to do, but now in a COVID type of world. Just on that with language, you might hear sometimes people saying things about post-COVID and that kind of language. However, the reality is that we're living in COVID, and until there are cures and vaccines, this is going to become our reality. Doesn't mean that it needs to be scary, but it does mean that we need to focus on being creative, which is why necessity is the mother of invention. So as a massive proponent of the future of work and working from home and flexible working, for many years, I've worked with organisations that have said to me the reasons why they can't allow their people to work from home. However, it's these same organisations that back in March, all of their people had to work from home. And so what's become really interesting to watch is that sometimes when there is that much pressure or pain to have to do something, we actually find a way to do it. And this is a really important lesson around problem solving and creating strategy and solutions in every aspect of business and the world in which we work. So we can get really creative. Now, this platform, for example, that we're using, Zoom, I've been using it for over 5 years, almost 6 years. However, for most people, it was not known. And so I never used it for personal reasons. I only used it for work. However, through COVID times, Zoom has become a very much part of my daily life in both work and for personal. So again, this shows us that we actually have a lot of technology available to us, which is the conversation of future of work, that are actually things that we just need to actually adopt. So for example, again, telehealth is another great example of that. We have the technology in place, however, we didn't have the funding in place. The federal government had planned that by 2030, that we would be in a position to have telehealth rolled out across Australia. Due to COVID, however, here in 2020, that funding was fast-tracked and money was found and the budget was included into it, and now we all have access to telehealth. So what this says to us is that we actually have a lot of fantastic technology today. However, sometimes it's a financial and a budgetary conversation or a paradigm shift in our thinking. But either way, what this is showing us is that as we prepare for a post-isolation workforce and ramping up our economy, that we do need to be more innovative and have more creativity and look at that from a problem-solving perspective to see what do we already have that's available to us and how can we do things differently and better. So as we go to the next slide, we have another poll. So I'll ask Alicia once again to pop that up. So as the restrictions lessen, what are your preferred ways of working? Or way rather, just pick one, please. So what we can see is that a hybrid approach is overall the most wanted and desired. And to be honest, that's probably the healthiest way for every organisation to have that. So what we'll talk about today is what does the hybrid approach look like? What is flexible working? So yes, working from home is absolutely one of the ways to do flexible working. However, it is often interchanged as one and the same thing. But what we know for sure is that it's not. The true definition of flexible working is the ability to negotiate how, when, and where you're working from, and the hours that you're working, and those kinds of conversations. And if you heard what I said, it's about negotiating. It's about finding what works best, not just for yourself, but for your team, your organization, the clients that you work with. There are a number of factors and variables that need to be taken into account. Now, flexible working isn't for everyone. If you saw the poll, some people said they didn't want to just work in the office. Other people said they just want to work from home. The truth is that especially now as we return to work in a COVID world, is that we will need to take care of one another. And so with that in mind, a hybrid approach is probably the most realistic way of going forward. It also means that people who may not feel comfortable about flexible working will have to work flexibly, whether that be different hours or different locations, in order to make sure that social distancing and taking care of one another takes place. One of the really great and positive impacts of COVID is that work has shifted around the recognition of the human beings that are working together. What we've seen through Zoom, sometimes CEOs and other times senior leaders sharing on their webinars and their Zooms conversations where a child might walk past them or an animal jumps in front of their screen. You know, really day-to-day normal things that some of us might just find normal, but for often senior leaders, this is not the image that they may have wanted to project. So we've seen another side of people, which is a really nice thing because it recognises that when we're working together, there's actually a really strong human element. It also shows that we're going to need to take care of one another more. So we can't, for example, just turn up to work and feel a little unwell and just soldier on. We actually need to recognise that if you do feel unwell, apart from getting tested, you do need to take personal responsibility and work from home. But it won't be seen anymore as a weakness. It will be actually seen as a strength. So these are some really interesting paradigms that we're going to start to see playing out going forward, and how this recognition of the human beings in our workplaces flows onto different types of policies and guidelines and how we interact with one another. Another thing that's been shown is the level of trust. And at the core of flexible working is the ability to trust each other that you're doing the work that you're meant to be doing, even if you can't see each other. Now, many of you actually might go, well, that's a bit obvious, isn't it? Well, it kind of is, but it's a lot easier said than done, particularly when in our organizations and the culture of work that we had in the pre-COVID world was not a trust-based one. This is part of the reason why flexible working was not so embraced, because a lot of leaders came from a command and control type of perspective, a much more older school type of leading, which meant that if I can't see you, how do I know that you're actually getting your job done? However, things have shifted, and particularly with COVID, it's fast-tracked things in a really fast way. And it means now that we can see, because of isolation, that productivity actually hasn't declined. We may have been faced with other challenges, such as actually feeling isolated, mental health issues, challenges around home learning with children and balancing work, responsibilities with aging parents, and a range of other issues that many people and families have had to deal with. However, what we can see is that people were doing the best that they could do, and that showed that there is a big that we can trust our people to do the right thing. It also shows that rather than focusing on how many hours somebody is doing, it's about the outcomes. And this is another shift around collaborative leadership. And it focuses on what is it that you can actually do to focus on the outcomes, whether they be key performance indicators, service level agreements, but not so much about how many hours you're sitting in front of a Zoom or in the office to get the job done. There will be continued uncertainty due to COVID, and we need to expect that. Schools will be suddenly shut down. We may need to change the way that we live once again due to different restrictions easing or coming back. This is going to be how it is for a while, and that is a level of acceptance. Things like less travel, but what that also means is more responsibility on the individual. We need to be able to communicate better with our team, to our leaders to tell them what we need, with our clients, and we need to become really quite comfortable in the fluidity and also the uncertainty in which we're living in. One of the observations I've been making, and I shared this with the Watermark team, and they suggested I put it into the webinar, is to share with you a quiet revolution around gender equity, something that I'm very passionate about. Because of the fact that we've had a lot of families having to work from home as well as school their children, what we've actually started seeing is a shift. That shift being that no longer are the gendered norms of, as a mother, you do the cooking, the cleaning and taking care of children, and as the man, you're the breadwinner. Now, you might hear what I'm saying and go, these are incredibly old-fashioned gendered norms that fit into the 1950s, not the 2020s. However, if you dig a little bit into this and scratch past the surface, these gendered norms are very much alive and well in our society. So what we've started to see, however, due to COVID and due to the fact that families now have had to be together during the time of quarantine, is that both parents have started to do more around the house. Roles were not so defined by gender. And so what we've started to see is more of a balancing that has happened, which has a really positive impact on the ability for women, particularly in the workforce. And going forward, what I'm really hoping is that because more and more people will be working in most realistically a hybrid fashion, it means that the conversation of who does what in regards to the family, to childcare, with homework, with shopping and cooking and cleaning, all the different things that are part of our lives, how does that engage in those family units is going to shift, hopefully. So we'll move on to the next part of today's session and talk about some of those direct impacts. So we're seeing if by working from home, that means less of a commute. So for those of you in Sydney or Melbourne, you would have seen a dramatic increase in the amount of traffic that's been happening. And in fact, some levels of gridlock, which is more than even pre-COVID. And that's due to the fact that less people are catching public transport because of the social distancing and choosing to use their cars more. And also, of course, because school has returned back to full time. But if you're working from home, that commute no longer is going to be an issue. So that might be a really great impact going forward. We're also hearing from employees and individuals that they're much more engaged in the work that they're doing. They're able to have a healthier lifestyle, focus on the work that when they need to be able to doing it, partly because they have more time, they're not traveling as much, and they're being much more productive in what they're doing day to day. And as I mentioned before, that human focus really recognizes and engages people in the work that they're doing and subsequently produce and create amazing results for their clients and in the organizations in which they work. On the next slide, we'll be talking about the impacts on our organizations. And what we're seeing, and to Lisa's point, that there is a lot of change happening out there, which is why interim executives are going to be, for a long time, whilst things are in such a period of flux, so very needed. Organizations are not in a position to be able to make long-term strategic plans like they used to. Economic markets across the world have not opened the way that Australia and New Zealand are because of the fact that we're ahead of the curve. Things are going up and down, and so we need to recognize the shifts in those markets. The other thing that's been really interesting to witness and observe has been the shift in consumer behavior. The whole thing about COVID is that it has focused and slingshotted the digitization of the way that we live and work and catapulted it straight front and center. Now, again, this might seem obvious. However, many organizations have not necessarily taken advantage of all the tools and different software that's available to them to be able to engage with consumers and clients and even with their own people within their organization as much as they would like to. Automation, robotics, AI, these are going to become much more part of our day-to-day and not just in the few. Because what we've seen is that COVID has definitely catapulted us and the adoption curve is going to become quite exponential. So some of the global trends is that that's going to be reflective as well, but we're going to have to start to see the focus on health has not shifted, particularly, for example, in the US and other events that are happening overseas. What we can see is that Australia is going to be opening up much faster before the rest of the world. So what impact does that have for your organization? Do you need to find new markets? Do you need to find new products and services? There's conversation of the Trans-Tasman bubble. What impact does that have in regards to the way that we govern and also do business? So we need to keep a close eye on these shifting trends. We need to keep a close eye on economic levels in regards to the numbers and a range of other aspects as well. And very importantly, organizations are going to have a very strong duty of care to their people. And the way that they return their workforce post-isolation back into the office, as mentioned, a hybrid model is going to probably be the most preferred. But what we have also already seen, a number of technology companies, global ones like Twitter and Facebook and others, that have already said, we might reopen our office, but there is absolutely no expectation for you to return into the office. If you choose to work from home, then that is fine by them. And we're seeing more and more organizations doing that, at least for the next 6 months, that's for sure. So whilst there's a high level of uncertainty, the absolute duty of care that organizations have to their people, that they have working with them, is going to be very much paramount and center of focus in their decision making, and also very importantly how they engage with clients and their consumers as well. So some of the benefits, however, is that because more people are going to be working from home, organizations might be able to reduce their rent, and that's a great saving for them to be able to then reinvest into hiring more people, focusing on R&D and creating new different services and product lines that adjust to the changing needs of the market. And it's also about having less office infrastructure as well because of the less space that's used. This can increase profitability and also productivity, but we will also see, because of the way we work forward, going around flexible working, increased engagement because the two are highly correlated. We'll also start to see less absenteeism. So some people, because of the fact that they're disengaged, or even the conversation around presenteeism, which is when they're physically there but not necessarily mentally engaged, we'll see that because of a healthier workforce, we're going to have more people going to be able to do their job better. But we are going to need to take care of people. And there is a very big focus around mental health. And this is not an issue that should be brushed under the carpet. It is so important that our Chief Medical Officer has actually created a deputy in Australia to focus on that. Julie Gillard has just taken up a new role around a global mental health program and company. And this is something that we've seen a massive increase in a lot of the Lifeline and other organisations that support the mental health of Australians alike. So this is not something to be pushed aside, and organisations will need to take this very, very seriously. So we'll now talk about around the conversation of innovation and creativity. Technology and infrastructure, as I mentioned before, a lot of fantastic programs, software and apps already exist. Zoom, for example, can be accessed from pretty much any platform, whether it be your laptop, computer, iPad, and even your phone. So no matter where you are, you could be listening to this webinar today whilst going for a walk, or from the comfort of your home, or even in your office. But the fact is, you're still going to have fantastic results in hearing the presentation and engaging by asking questions in the same way. And Zoom is just one of the countless number of platforms and technologies that are available to us. However, many organizations haven't looked to them because often Zoom was considered a startup type product, but we can see that it has a high level, that it's highly robust and it is incredibly high level of quality. And there are many, many other software as a service or SaaS products that are available to us at a very low cost. So organizations really need to start thinking about how are they going to digitize what they're doing? How are they going to stay connected with their people, and very importantly with their clients and their customers and consumers. So this conversation around digitization is going to be front and center and at the heart of many, many decisions going forward. It's also a fantastic opportunity to think differently. We are given an opportunity, and there has been a term used on regular use and rotation, which is reset. We are in a position to now look at how we worked before, what worked, what didn't, and also, as we talked about, necessity is the mother of all invention. What do we actually have to change? Obvious things is, for example, how we work. We will not be able to all be in the office at the same time for a very long time. And so what does that mean of how we engage with each other as a team? What tools can we use to brainstorm, to share documents, to make sure that everybody's across all the information that they need to know, and not just by having a Zoom chat, but through a number of different things. And I can tell you now that there's already some fantastic products out there, but I already have seen a number of people and organizations coming up with new things in response to COVID. And that's exactly what we're going to start to see. People need to think differently and come up with new solutions and new outcomes and be really creative and innovative, which is why a lot of people have turned to entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial thinking in this space to help them think differently about going forward. But there's no reason why in the corporate or government or not-for-profit sector that this same way of thinking, being agile in thought and pivoting quickly, doesn't mean that it can't be done in every other aspect as well. What we are starting to see is talk around growth in manufacturing. The National Press Club had Karen Andrews talking around this. We're talking about, shift around health, about supply chain and logistics. We've seen a massive spike of online consumer behavior, and there's so many more things happening. So what I can recommend, because where we are today is going to be different even in a week's time, is stay across what's happening, not just around from government announcements, but look to the peak bodies of the health and manufacturing, from retail and online. Also keep an eye on what's happening in the startup space, because there's some really interesting webinars and information coming from there as well. And you're going to start to get some really great ideas of what is coming down the line as well going forward. So as we move to the next slide, we actually have one more poll before we wrap up our webinar today. So this is actually something that came to us because it's a question that a number of people have been asking us, which is, do you see change in how client meetings are conducted and the way in which we do business going forward? Please share with me and the team what your thoughts are on this. And the polls are in. Same way in regards to what you referred to and how you'd like to be working in a hybrid model, the same thing is in regards to how you're going to be engaging with your clients going forward and having meetings. And I think that's a realistic and a true reflection of where organisations are at the moment. So going forward, the path to recovery is that Australia, thankfully, is in a position to move forward. From a health perspective, we're flattening the curve and our numbers are quite low. Yes, there are clusters. We should still be cautious. We should still maintain social distancing, but we're now prepared and ready to shift to the economic focus, which is what we've seen our governments of both federal and state starting to do over the last couple of weeks. There are many conversations and articles, and there's even one in today's Age and Sydney Morning Herald, and the Fin Review around, will there be another wave? This is not a new conversation. But if we continue to do what we've been doing, we're going to maintain the flattening of that curve, which will then subsequently mean that we're going to be stimulating our economy faster. Australia's economy is part of a global economy, and I think that's something that we've talked about and is fair to say. It's also a trading nation. And so because of these facts, it's going to be some time until we're going to be in a position to be able to be back where we once were, and if not thriving and striving forward. The conversation before shutdown was that we were going to snap back after 3 months of being in quarantine and isolation. However, I think everybody, including Scott Morrison, recognised that this isn't the case. Conversations how to minimise or even avoid a recession, things around what we can be doing to stimulate the economy, new industries, new trades, new products and services. The conversation of how to be innovative and creating change is going to become part of our vernacular and the way that we work and go forward. And entrepreneurial thinking is going to be at the heart of this. And many of the roundtables that I've attended, and both at government and at corporate level, entrepreneurial thinking is something that has become at the heart of what people feel that they need to move forward. And when I say entrepreneurial thinking, what do I say by that? And what do I mean? It means that there is a constant state of change, that you need to be innovative and looking at the situation not as, well, this is what we've always done, so that's how we're going to go forward, but as an opportunity to improve, an opportunity to grow and to scale, an opportunity to do things differently, not just because, but because of the fact that we need to be able to progress. We need to be creating more jobs and new opportunities. It also means that you need to pivot. So if you recognize that this is a path that's not working, that you can quickly fail and go, no, that didn't work. We need to change our direction. So there is an agility in the thinking, being able to change direction quickly and acknowledge where there are successes and even failures and where things aren't working. And something that might seem to be working because of our economy and the situations in which we're finding ourselves in may also change, and we have to be open to that and have a very, very flexible way of thinking. So in summary, and I can see there's quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to wrap up and try and address those. What we can see is that working in a COVID world is going to require a lot of us to think differently, to work in a different way to the way we did prior to going into isolation around COVID. But it's also, in my opinion, a massive opportunity for us to be able to change the things that weren't working anyway, so we can actually do a bit of housekeeping there, but also recognize that there are massive opportunities for us to go forward and create some fantastic things for Australia and for the world. Thanks, Lisa. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Natalie. That's really valuable. Really appreciate your insights there. I'm just conscious of time, so I just want to fit in a couple of questions if we can. I have a question here. So you mentioned that we'll never go back to the way it was, and the way we do certain things will be different in the future. What do you think will be the biggest changes? And do you have any tips how one can cope with the fact that the world has changed so rapidly?
So I'm going to go back to the infographic that you actually shared, where you had your fear mindset through to the growth mindset. And that's something that I think is a really, really important thing to recognize. So just on that, there is the conversation around fear and the changes that happen, and that's a really normal, very normal response to what's happened. However, what we're starting to see is that by going forward and actually having a growth mindset and being able to make opportunities happen is, and to your words, Lisa, you use the word acceptance. That acceptance is an acceptance that change and flexibility is going to happen. Will we be able to work the way that we were before? Will we be able to engage with our clients and our customers? Will we be able to live how we lived before? The answer to that, and I think everybody knows that, is no, we're not. And it's still quite early to say, well, how will that actually be different? Some of it will be imposed on us. So for example, we're told things that we can and cannot do. So right now, today, We have to social distance, so we can't all work in the office. But that's actually going to become, I believe, a way that we're going to work going forward. We will find that flexibility become a lot more normal. And as I mentioned, it's not just the working from home. It's going to be different start and finish times. It's going to be addressing the needs of different shifts. It's going to be a range of different ways of working flexibly. But that's also going to shift the type of leadership models and the type of outcomes and the way we do our strategies. So these are the type of things that will change on an individual level. But as I mentioned, I also see that there's going to be a lot more opportunity for Australia, for example, to increase its trading capacity in a range of new products and services because of necessity of us having to do it ourselves right now, because we can't tap into other markets. We're creating things that before we hadn't created for a long time because we pushed it offshore. So on an individual level, these different mindsets are going to be the things that are going to help us propel going forward. But on a global scale and an organizational scale, I think we're still very much at the beginning. So it's a watch this space. It's going to be a moving feast.
Okay, and I might just try and squeeze in one more if we can.
Sure.
If I start a new company as an interim executive and everyone is working from home, how would you suggest I get the lay of the land quickly?
Look, I checked in actually with a couple of my friends who've done this both here in Australia and in the US, and they gave me some really great advice. Just in the same way that you would do so in a pre-COVID time, it's about networking and getting connected. So if you aren't working in the office, it's about finding out from the people that you're working close with or the individual that's brought you into the business, like who are the key stakeholders, who are the people that I need to speak with, and making it a proactive effort to connect in with them, not just on the phone, but in a Zoom or some kind of video conferencing, because you want to start connecting with people in that way and really having that human interaction, making sure that you don't feel fearful from asking questions and engaging as much as you possibly can, because I think those are the kinds of things that will help you feel not only connected, but help you with your growth and learning curve as well. I think the other thing as well that my friends have shared with me, and the kind of things I've observed as well, is that because we're working in a new environment and in a new way, the expectations of how we work and the paradigms have shifted. And so, yes, you want to still be professional, but you need to wear a suit and tie every day, especially if you're working from home. These are the things where, yes, you want to maintain a level of professionalism, but you still want to project a normality in the things that you're doing day to day. So being proactive and putting yourself out there are the biggest things that you can be doing, and engaging with people, connecting with them on LinkedIn and other spaces as well, and sharing some of the thought leadership that I'm sure many of you have as well.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I think we're going to have to wrap up there because of time, but that was really valuable. I hope everyone that's attended today enjoyed the webinar and found it as valuable as we did. Please don't hesitate to reach out. As I mentioned earlier, we're here to assist in any way we can. But for now, I think it's time to go. So we wish you a wonderful afternoon and look forward to staying in contact. Bye for now.